How's it going, guys? So, I want to talk about something that comes to mind a lot for me these days, and this is the idea that I don't think people are looking at a lot of this household data as much as they should be, if they are at all. And there's definitely people out there who do look at it, but like, let's say I were to engage maybe like a big account, say like on Twitter, who maybe they like specialize in housing or just macro. And when I talk to them about these things, it's almost as if crickets, and they oftentimes just don't really even understand just how a household is defined or even measured is kind of a little alarming to me. And if you know anything about me, I come at it from this angle because right now, if you want to think about like where the economy goes from here and something like housing, which is obviously tied to the wealth effect, and housing is, in my opinion, the economic cycle, then how can you have a position on something like residential real estate if you don't understand your customer, which is the household? And obviously, it hasn't mattered for the better part of the last 15 years, but things have changed and we're in an elevated rate environment and things are very expensive. So, I mean, what I'm describing is a scenario where understanding the consumer, i.e., the household, underpins the entire real estate like investment thesis, like residential real estate. And look, I mean, I have spoken with a very reputable source who has told me, and this would only make sense, that a lot of that household data, especially at a very local level, is not in a Bloomberg terminal. So it does, in fact, make sense why you have these very, I would say, limited dialogues with folks like that. So it's extremely important. And look, again, like I said from the beginning, it's not as if people don't look at that information. I mean, there are definitely folks who do. I mean, if you're like in the mortgage industry or whatever, I mean, even if you're just looking at like the mortgage data, and those guys oftentimes have like access to even a lot of this household stuff. Not always, but oftentimes they will. Like the mortgage data, like in isolation, is not going to give you a comprehensive view into households because by definition, you are ignoring renters. Okay. And that's like 1/3 of households, or roughly 45-ish million households, something like that. That's a problem. Okay. But, again, like there's just so many things that they measure around households. It's almost as if you could reasonably predict what color socks, your neighbor Cindy over there is going to wear like on a Tuesday. Okay. I mean, it really is just enormous, just the amount of data that they track around these households, physical characteristics, financial characteristics, like even like around like the housing stock itself. Okay. It just goes on and on and on. I mean, like the type, age, and size of households, how that changes over time. Like what is it? Tenure by size. If you just wanted to look at those two elements together, I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. Mobility. Okay, like okay, I keep saying this, and now people are kind of catching on to the fact that and there's like maybe only one or two other people who are like, oh yeah, it's just going to spread to say like the Northeast or Midwest. You could have a scenario where like really the United States as a whole, it just doesn't really matter what market, they're all structurally oversupplied, but you can have that occurring while at the same time, say maybe in the Sun Belt, listings for sale are just higher in general than, say, what you'll see in the Northeast and the Midwest. But now what's happened is you're starting to see very strong markets like Boston, Buffalo, Philadelphia, even Chicago, like these metro areas where, yes, listings for sale are still rather low, but you're starting to see the beginning phases of weakness because active listings with price cuts are well ahead of schedule for this time of the year, and it just shouldn't be that way if there's a true structural shortage. And it just gets back to these local dynamics, all of which are really tied together by the household. In other words, knowing who lives in the home. So, I wrote a piece about Buffalo and the mobility dynamics going on there. I'll expand on that some later Substack post because I know that there's, at least I think there's a lot of interest in those markets because, again, people think that this is isolated and it's just not. There's no math there. But, okay, when I will say that, inevitably I will make somebody mad and they'll figure out a way of taking a statement like that or an observation like that personally when all I am doing is simply relaying information, ironically, for free. So I would just encourage people to consider what you don't know and the fact that people do look at data at a very granular level across the country, okay? They do. And it's not a bold statement. If anything, the best way I think of internalizing knowing something like this is it's better to know than not know, obviously. And really what ultimately matters is your wallet at the end of the day. And could, these household trends and knowing what they look like across different markets, maybe especially where you have an investment property, I don't know, could it, be the difference in, say, maybe a little loss versus a big loss? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just a matter of being comprehensive. That's all I'm really describing. So anyway, yeah, stay tuned for more posts on that part of the country, and I'll get into it a little bit more, guys. I mean, if anything, I would just prefer to show data and not even talk about these things because ultimately that's all I care about. I will hear people all the time, again, very strong opinions about things, and their position on things is based on a hunch. And that's going to get you into trouble, okay? Because their chances are, all right, there is a data point around whatever you have a hunch about, okay? So it would just be great if people would just, hey, let's try and take a data-driven approach and to not take a lot of these things personally too. So, yeah, that's all I got, guys. Have a good one.